It began like any other flight smoothboarding, tired passengers settling in, the usual chatter fading into the hum of the engines. In row 12, a young woman rested her head against the window, drifting into sleep as the plane climbed steadily. Into the night sky, nothing seemed unusual. The attendants were busy with service, children whispered to their parents, and the captain's calm voice had earlier promised a routine journey. But what no one knew was that this flight was about to become anything but routine. Halfway through the journey, an unexpected announcement crackled over the intercom. The captain's tone carried an urgency that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "if there is a pilot on board, please make yourself known to the crew." The words struck like thunder in the silent air. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Murmurs spread row by row, and fear began to rise. Why would a captain ask such a question? Something was clearly wrong. Eyes darted across the cabin, searching for someone, anyone who could step forward. People began whispering about emergencies, about mechanical issues, about what could possibly force the captain to call out for help in midair. In row 12, the young woman stirred, unaware that she was at the center of what was unfolding. She blinked awake, confused by the sudden tension that hung over the passengers around her. No one could imagine that the answer to the captain's plea was closer than anyone expected. The young woman's life, carefully kept private until now, held a secret that might decide the fate of everyone on board. As attendants moved quickly through the aisles, searching for a response, the weight of silence pressed harder on the cabin. The question remained, would anyone stand up, and if so, could they save the flight? And in that tense moment, all eyes slowly turned toward row 12. The woman in row 12 sat up fully now, her heartbeat quickening as she noticed the way people were looking at her. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Surely they weren't staring at her. But the whispers grew louder, and it was clear that for some reason, attention had shifted in her direction. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, still groggy from her nap, and tried to understand what was happening. The captain's words echoed in her mind. Is there a pilot on board? The very question sounded unreal, like something out of a movie. Around her, tension kept rising. A mother clutched her child closer. An elderly man shook his head in disbelief, and the attendants rushed by with urgent steps. One of them paused briefly near row 12, their eyes locking with hers, as if silently asking a question they didn't dare speak aloud. The woman lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening on the armrest. She hadn't wanted this, not here, not now. For years, she had quietly left behind the life that once defined her. Flying had been her passion, her pride, and also her burden. She had trained harder than most, carried herself through storms both in the air and in her own life. Fand finally decided she was done. Walking away from the cockpit had been her choice, a secret chapter she rarely shared, especially with strangers. On this flight, she was supposed to be just another passenger, invisible in row 12. But now, the situation was pulling her past back into the present. The urgency in the captain's voice was not something she could ignore. Something was wrong. Up front, seriously wrong. And though no one else on board knew her story, she did. She knew exactly what those words meant. The silence in the cabin grew heavier, every second stretching longer, waiting for someone to rise. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized the decision that loomed before her. Would she stay hidden or stand? She sat frozen in her seat, feeling the weight of dozens of curious eyes. The announcement still echoed in her ears, louder than the steady roar of the engines outside. Passengers were whispering, speculating about what could be happening in the cockpit. Some thought the captain might be unwell, others feared something mechanical had gone wrong. Whatever the reason, the idea that the crew needed another pilot mid-flight was enough to send fear running down every aisle. The woman's chest tightened as memories she had worked so hard to bury began to surface. She remembered long hours. In training, the sharp smell of jet fuel and the steady calm she once carried when gripping the controls of an aircraft. Flying had been her world. It was more than a job, it was a part of who she was. But along with the pride came the weight of responsibility. There had been one flight, years ago, that changed everything. A storm, a decision, and the lingering guilt that she had never truly escaped. Walking away had seemed like the only way to move forward. Since then, she never looked back. And yet, here she was, thousands of feet in the air. Seated in row 12, as fate seemed to be calling her again. The irony was not lost on her. She had chosen this particular flight because it was supposed to be simple, quiet, even healing. Now, the silence around her felt suffocating, broken only by the uneven breaths of nervous passengers and the quick steps of flight. Attendants searching for answers, her hands pressed firmly against her knees, steadying herself. She hadn't spoken a word yet, but inside, a storm was building. The question was no longer just the captain's. It was hers too. Would she reveal who she truly was, or remain a passenger in the shadows? The tension in the cabin grew heavier with every passing second. The air felt charged, as though everyone on board was holding their breath at once. The captain's voice had not returned, and that silence spoke louder than any announcement could. The attendants moved quickly, their polite smiles replaced by tight expressions of worry. A man in the aisle seat muttered under his breath, "Something's wrong. Badly wrong." His words only added to the unease, spreading like wildfire. In row 12, she could feel her pulse racing, the rhythm drumming against her ribs. Her instincts screamed at her to get up, to walk to the front, to answer the call. But her mind battled back, reminding her of why she had left, of the promise she made never to step into that role again. She stared at her trembling hands, knowing they were hands that had once carried lives safely through storms. Yet now, even lifting them seemed impossible. All around her, passengers were searching, scanning the cabin, desperate for someone to stand. A businessman in row 5 started asking loudly if anyone had flying experience, his voice cracking as he called out. No one answered. A teenager gripped his mother's arm, whispering if the plane was going to fall. Each moment of silence, only, made the fear sharper, almost unbearable. She swallowed hard, trying to push back the tide of emotion crashing inside her. The cabin lights flickered slightly, just enough to send a ripple of panic through the passengers. Gasps filled the air, and the attendants exchanged worried looks before hurrying toward the cockpit. That was the moment her decision pressed down with full force. Every eye seemed to return to her row, as if somehow, without words, they sensed the truth that the person who could change everything might already be among them. Her breath caught in her throat as she gripped the armrest, the weight of the moment threatening to break her silence. Somewhere ahead, behind that locked cockpit door, the fate of the flight hung in the balance. And in row 12, the choice that could alter it all was seconds away. Her knuckles were white against the armrest when another announcement finally broke the silence. But this time, it wasn't the captain's voice. It was shaky, uncertain, belonging to someone else. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. The captain has become unwell. We are doing everything we can to manage the situation. The words stumbled out, heavy with strain, and the cabin erupted in nervous whispers. Some passengers gasped, others clutched their seats tighter. The reality was no longer hidden. Something had gone terribly wrong in the cockpit. She felt her stomach twist. A first officer flying alone at cruising altitude was already risky, but what if the situation worsened? What if the first officer wasn't able to land safely? She knew better than anyone how much training, composure, and calm it took in emergencies. And now, The thought that one mistake could seal the fate of everyone on board made her chest tighten. But before she could decide to rise, another complication hit. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, pale-faced, clutching a small medical kit. "We need a doctor. Is there a doctor on board?" she called out, her voice trembling. The cabin was thrown into fresh chaos. Not only was the cockpit in jeopardy, but now someone in the cabin was facing a medical emergency. The plane felt like it was unraveling piece by piece. The fear, almost tangible, the woman in row 12 felt trapped between two crises: her secret ability to help in one, and the helplessness of watching another unfold before her eyes. Passengers were shifting, panicking, voices rising as the flight felt more unstable by the second. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She was no longer just a bystander. With the captain down, a first officer under strain, and a cabin on the verge of panic, she realized the stakes had doubled. The fate of the flight and everyone on it was spiraling closer to her than she could have ever imagined. And the next move would change everything. She finally stood, her legs unsteady, but her resolve clear. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers turned to watch her step into the aisle. The attendant nearest to her froze for a moment, then hurried over. Without hesitation, she leaned close and whispered, "I can fly." The words came out firm, steady, so different from the storm raging inside her chest.